Good day and welcome to Lightning EV Talk, Lightning eMotors podcast on all things commercial electric vehicles. My name is Nick Bettis. I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales Operations here at Lightning eMotors, and today I'm joined by Roger Vartanian, our Director of Sales for the western half of the United States.
Good morning. Welcome. Good morning, Nick. How are you today? Hello, everyone.
So a little background on why we do this podcast. Lightning brings together thought leaders from both within our organization as well as from outside in order to provide honest and accurate information for our listeners on everything related to commercial EVs from the business side to the technical side. And in this week, we're recording another podcast in the series on what we call the electrification equation. And this is a series of 6 variables that we have found over our 15 years of working with commercial electric fleets that when you add them all up, they generally result in a successful electric vehicle deployment. So those variables are selecting the right vehicles, selecting the right charging and getting it deployed, checking the right software, so telematics software as well as control software, financing, maintenance, and support. And then ultimately funding that would amplify all of those other pieces, external funding such as LONO and HVIP and EPA grants and that sort of thing. So those are the 6 variables. And today we're going to be talking about selecting the right vehicles. And that's why we've asked Roger to join us. He's been in the industry for a long time and he has got a lot of good information to add. So let's just get started. Let's start off by discussing the various considerations when it comes to selecting the right vehicles. What are the basic things that a fleet manager should be looking at when they're thinking about which vehicle should I select?
Well, the very first thing they should actually look at is consider what their current fleet looks like and what the application and operation of that fleet is. And then be open-minded to understand there are going to be some changes within that. But really, the platforms that we build at Lightning can pretty much cover everything that you would possibly currently have in your fleet. But really understand what it is that you want to accomplish with your fleet. Yes, they'll be electric, but try and guide yourself towards operating your fleet as efficiently as you have with the same type of equipment, but understanding there's going to be some changes as we go along through the process. But really, look at the different chassis, what the upfits may look like, what the functionality it is. With electric, we'll get into range and things like that. But first, to start with, look at your current fleet. What is it that you want to accomplish, and how can you best use the current configurations and chassis to make a good decision.
Great. Okay. So you mentioned range. Let's just jump into that one because that's generally the first concern. Everybody talks about range anxiety, and it's a thing. It's real.
Yes, it is.
And it's something that needs to be considered both from a fleet manager's perspective as can these vehicles actually do what I need them to do, but also from the driver's perspective of there's a little bit of anxiety. Am I going to get back to base? Because I can't just stop on the corner necessarily.
Not yet.
And fill up. So let's talk a little bit about what range considerations our listeners should be thinking about.
Right. So what you actually want to do, range is multifunctional in terms of what it actually do, because you have to look at not only how many miles you're going to be driving each day, but what do those routes look like? Are they hilly? Are they flat? What do the temperatures look like within the environments that you're operating the vehicle? These all affect what ranges a vehicle will get. Fortunately, at Lightning eMotors, we have the best-in-class ranges for the vehicles that we build. But so if you look at it from your starting point and say, okay, my service body truck runs about 200 miles a day, then you would talk to one of our sales associates and explain what type of vehicle you have and the type of mileage and driving conditions that you would ultimately want to accomplish with that vehicle itself. The equation on the driver is how efficient the vehicle or the driver drives the vehicle will ultimately also dedicate how much range it has. But you get into that once you've made a decision, because that's driver training. You can show someone once you've determined the right vehicle, right number of battery packs that you need inside the vehicle to get the range you want, then you can only maximize it once the driver knows how to drive the vehicle efficiently.
Right. And that plays into one of our other variables and then one of the other podcasts that we've recorded as well. And that's the software side. And when you've got the telematics to understand how the driver is driving the vehicle and what kind of routes you really are driving from a range perspective. That really feeds back into this piece then, and which vehicles do I choose? So.
Yeah, the telematics are huge. And again, I would suggest to every fleet, the one thing that you have to take into consideration, of course, the vehicle, your charging, and of course the telematics. Because without it, you're running blind. I mean, you can guesstimate, it's easy with an ICE vehicle because you look at the gas gauge, you estimate how much gas you put in it versus the miles that you went. With EV, it's a little bit different because it's shorter ranges, but it's important to understand how efficient that vehicle is running during the course of the day, not only from the driver's standpoint, but the auxiliary parts that are being used on the vehicle, HVAC, DC to DC components, things like that, all will bring the range down, but they can be managed through the telematic systems because it's all visible.
Yeah. So you mentioned routes several times. So one of the things that I've heard in talking to some fleets is, well, one of my routes is 200 miles, and one of my routes is 140, and one of my routes is 60. Mm-hmm. I want all my vehicles to be able to go 200 miles. Is that something we can continue to think like?
Again, when I mentioned earlier, the fleets have to look at possibly changing some of the ways they do business. Is it possible? Yeah, you can buy all your vehicles and say, okay, this particular model can get out to 200 miles of range under the optimum driving conditions. But is it realistic? Not really, because everything changes, right? But you'd have to look at how you can dispatch your vehicles. Maybe it's something where you're working in let's say a 50-mile geographic region, and your furthest outreaches, you want your 200-mile vehicles to go to. On your closer regions and things where you have an opportunity maybe to come back in, opportunity charge, you can use those vehicles because they're closer to base in order to be able to extend your range. So it's really just taking the fleet and maximizing its usage based on its design, if that makes sense.
And on an individual route basis.
Exactly.
It may not be a situation where it's the best thing for your fleet to have all your vehicles be able to service that one route that's a little bit longer. Tailor those vehicles to your specific route, or at least have a few of them for each of those range requirements.
Yeah, fixed routing is a lot easier to determine because the vehicle's going to point A to point B throughout the course of the day. It's when you get into, let's say, the commercial vehicle side where you may have a plumbing van that's could be going all over a city somewhere. You don't know where it is, but what you would have to do then is maximize the charging opportunities you have. So let's say, a plumber's going out, he's got a dispatch of 4 or 5 jobs. He knows he's going to do 250 miles that day. Okay. Well, he's going to wind up taking a break for lunch. Gear yourself to make sure that you're in a region that has a level 3 charger, and then you could turn around and plug that charger in, charge it for an hour and a half, and you're going to get it back up to about 85, 90, 80 to 90%. So it's very doable. It's understanding that the technology is now here. The infrastructure is coming very, very quickly. And most of the places where we deploy vehicles, charging is not an issue. They're abundant. And it's just a matter of managing it more than anything else. That's where, when you're deciding on the vehicle that you want, talk to your regional sales manager to discuss all of these factors. We've gone through it multiple times and can definitely guide you in the right location, but it's not hard to do.
Great. So you mentioned there's a number of things that are going to impact range. So we've talked about driver behavior. We've talked about, you've mentioned temperature, for example, hilly conditions. With range anxiety, a lot of that is dependent on a number of those things. How much let's just say temperature, how much does that really impact the range of a vehicle?
Yeah, so on our vehicles are thermostatically controlled. So there's a water coolant system and heating system on the battery and the powertrain. With that being said, there's pumps that have to drive that work off the 12-volt system that basically is taking the high voltage from the high voltage batteries through our DC to DC converter, which is replacing your alternator, and using that to operate the pumps and keep the vehicle cool. Also, from a temperature standpoint, in terms of operating for passenger vehicles and buses, your air conditioning components also draw down on the battery. So a lot of it is going to depend on all of that usage. I've seen fleets that have multiple radios and telematics programs that they add on to the vehicle itself that may run off the 12-volt. And you'll see in the daily analytics program exactly what's being used, how much of that charge is being used by those various components. Understanding that no matter what vehicle you drive, temperature is going to make a huge difference in electric vehicles. It's just going to. So you have to build that into your routing and your dispatching.
Right. Yeah.
And your vehicle design.
Yeah, and we can certainly help with that too. We've got pushing 3 million miles now of real world fleet miles on the road. We have all of that telematics data, and we've actually analyzed it. So if you've got a route, for example, that's in an extremely cold condition or extremely hilly condition, San Francisco, let's say, we can pull that data and we can give you a pretty good estimate on what kind of range impact that's going to have operating in those conditions.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, one of the really cool products or features that we're coming up with is a fleet planner that our marketing department put together that'll allow you, before you even get online, to see exactly what you put in a number of parameters. I think it's like 10 questions. Plug in, answer those 10 questions, and then it will actually suggest the vehicles that we build, what would best work for your scenario. And now you've basically, before you've even talked to anyone, have a good idea. Oh yeah, well that E450 will work for me, or maybe that van I can get away with that versus a bigger vehicle, things like that. So it's a really good function that we've got to come out, and I think it's rolling out in the next month or so.
Yeah, it is indeed. So let's talk about function or use cases. So we tailor our vehicles to passenger transportation and cargo transportation, both, especially applications like ambulances and school buses and such as well. Each of those has, in a lot of cases, its own specific needs as far as functionality, lifts and such. Talk a little bit about the considerations, and when you're thinking about going electric and you're looking at different vendors, what kind of capability should they have to be able to address those?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we haven't touched yet is weight capacity of the vehicle. GVWR, and because we're adding battery packs that are significant in weight, making sure that whatever upfit that vehicle is going to get, that you don't exceed the GVWR. So, within Lightning, we've got, personnel, myself being one, that actually monitors the upfits that we can put on our vehicles based on our customers' conversations, and say, okay, sir, you're running a vehicle that has 10 passengers now. You want to have, a range of 200 miles. We know to get that on one charge, to get that to even get close, we have to do a 3 battery pack. Well, we may only be able to do 10 passengers then at that point, but you also run a lift and a wheelchair position. You may have to look at decreasing your passenger capacity based on the weight, because of course you can't exceed that GVWR. So that's a big thing to take into consideration. And again, through the design process and talking with the sales rep, we'll be able to understand, okay, here's what my parameters are, my current operating conditions, my current vehicle, where can I go with it now to apply an electric vehicle to my fleet?
Right. And as you said, I was actually in at an event recently, and there was a fleet manager roundtable, and that was one of the biggest comments they made is, well, it's just too complex to understand how I need all of these things to work together and to make that vehicle effective for me. And I don't know how to do that. So, please come to us, talk to Roger, talk to his team and we can guide you through that. And we're going to give you honest information. That's why we're doing this podcast. And that's why we've got all the data we've got in order to provide, factual-based feedback.
We, as Nick mentioned, we're pushing 3 million customer-driven miles on our various platforms. We understand exactly what our platforms are capable of doing on the multitude of different operating conditions and vehicle designs themselves. So really, let us take the anxiety out of your hands and allow us to use our expertise to be able to design and coordinate your electrification plans.
Yeah. So you mentioned drivers earlier also. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit. One of the other things that I hear fairly frequently is it's hard to find drivers. It's hard to keep drivers. Mm-hmm. Are deploying electric vehicles good for finding and keeping drivers? Can anybody just jump in one of these and drive them?
The short answer is yes, anybody can, but it comes down to training them. Now, when I say training, believe it or not, driving an electric vehicle is much easier than it is to drive an ICE vehicle. From a driver fatigue standpoint, it truly is a one-pedal driving experience. So really, someone that's been driving in a fleet, I would say within a half hour, will truly appreciate the acceleration of the vehicle, the regenerative braking of the vehicle, the smoothness of it, and that they can actually drive a smoother driving experience and actually create less fatigue. It's much easier to drive this. It's just a matter of getting behind the wheel and trying it. If we were talking about consumer vehicles, that's probably a bigger jump, right? Because someone's been driving a gasoline-powered car their entire life. But fleets, for most part, they've gone through some training to begin with. Our training on that side is very, very simple. Yeah. There isn't a demo that I haven't gone on where someone has never even driven an electric vehicle and they say, wow, this is amazing. How easy is it? I don't have to step on the brake. It can slow its vehicle down. I basically, I can stop on a hill and it stops and locks itself in place with hill hold. It has all the drivability of an ICE engine, but it's much easier to drive. I like to say it's like driving an electric cart, honestly. That's simplifying it, but it really is.
Yeah, and one pedal driving is a thing now. There is still a brake, but
yes.
I drove one of our demos from Loveland, Colorado to Denver. It's about a 60-mile drive, and I never touched the brake until I had to come to a complete stop on the exit ramp, which is great for brake maintenance and all of it. And you're getting power back every time you take your foot off the accelerator.
Yeah, it was just a quick side note. Last week I was driving from Flagstaff, Arizona back down to Phoenix, and I had a significant portion of the highway that I was on, probably about 25 miles, that was significantly downhill. And through the efficient driving that I'm used to driving it, I basically never touched the brake and just feathered the accelerator. And I actually gained charge coming back down the hill. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't significant, but I didn't use any charge. Right. And in the Crystal Cockpit that we have, it's almost like a video game. You can see in real time exactly how efficient you're driving. So when you keep that charging line in closest to the middle line, you're not using too much charge, and you know how much regenerative braking you are. That's how you know you're driving efficiently.
Yep. And you can even turn that into a game with your drivers and put gamification programs in place. The driver with the highest efficiency for any given week gets a $50 Amazon gift card. We've done that with some of our customers before that have come to us and said, "Hey, we're not getting the efficiency that you promised us." And so we looked at the telematics and we saw obviously that it was driver behavior that was causing the problem, and we put those programs in place. And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, the vehicles are getting exactly the efficient they were supposed to. So
you're not driving a 67 Chevelle. You're driving an electric vehicle, so you're not trying to burn it off the line or slamming the brakes. Right. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So.
Exactly. Yep. So chassis today are hard to come by in general, whether they be internal combustion or electric or either one. We've got some options. We throw terms around like electrification and repowers and ground up. Explain the difference between those three different options and maybe some of the benefits of each.
Yeah. So again, across the board, whether it be consumer or retail, there's definitely chassis issues in terms of the availability to them. One of the programs that we have, and quite frankly, it goes across all of our platforms, we can actually repower any vehicle that we currently build or in that parameter within a certain years going back, so that even if you wanted to just get into the electrification process, you could do so without having to buy a whole new vehicle. We could, for instance, let's say we're talking a transit van, and if it was 2014 or 15 and newer, assuming it's in good physical condition, we can pull that ICE engine out and then put a whole brand new electric powertrain in for basically half the cost. So it's a great way, and the bigger the vehicle, the more cost effective it gets.
Absolutely.
We're doing everything from vans all the way up to shuttle buses, all the way up to transit buses.
And motor coaches.
Yeah, so you're talking $1 million vehicles, and you're doing it for literally 2/3, not even a third of the cost. So it's definitely an efficient way to get into it. And it's the same driving experience, same efficiencies, everything is the same because it's just being done on a used vehicle.
Right. A lot of these chassis have 25-year lifespans on them.
Yes.
And you're having to replace the powertrain anyway because the diesel engines are getting blown after 2 or 3 or 5 years. You may as well go ahead and reuse that, keep the chassis out of the scrapyard. This is another way to be efficient or sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in the environments that I live in southern or in Arizona, so rust is never an issue. Same thing in California for the most part. So those bodies are in great shape. Yeah. It's a much more efficient way, and you look at it as a total cost of a return on investment. You're going to put a new electrification or EV vehicle, electric engine or powertrain into the vehicle. You're getting a brand new vehicle for the most part. Yeah. And now you've got a lifespan again of, as long as the body lasts, you can always replace brakes. And you're replacing your maintenance is 70% less than it is on the ICE engine that you ran.
Exactly.
So, it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, I mean, you're actually making money on your vehicle at that point. Really.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so we at Lightning, we do a number of different things. So we do what we call electrification, which is taking a new chassis and electrifying that with an all-electric powertrain. We do repowers on specific model years and with vehicles in good condition. And we've also announced that we're manufacturing our own chassis coming out in 2023.
Yeah, very exciting.
Which will be what we call a ground up, or what the industry generally calls a ground up vehicle.
Yep.
So we'll have the full gambit and the full breadth of classes as well. So class
Correct.
3, although class 3, 4, 5, 6 in passenger and cargo, and even up in 7 and 8, and like you said, the transit buses, 35-foot transit buses, 40-foot transit buses and motor coaches. So the full width.
And once we have the e-chassis up and running, we're going to be able to use that same chassis over across of multiple industries. So step vans and work trucks and
shuttle buses.
I mean, you name it. It's going to be
buses.
multifunctional, and quite frankly, it's going to be more cost effective because we're not having to buy an ICE engine, pull the engine out, and tossing it.
Right.
So now you're buying a ground up, specific for your industry as well.
Yeah. And our target is to have a higher GVWR on each of the classes as well.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, last question I always ask everybody is if you had one piece of advice to give to our listeners on what they should be thinking about when they're thinking about vehicles, what would that be?
Yeah, I actually wrote this one down because it's hard to say one thing, so I'm actually broke it down into 4. Number 1, partner with an electric vehicle manufacturer that has the vehicles on the ground running today. Many are getting into the space and they are promising, we'll be able to do this, this, and this. I've seen it multiple times. Companies have gone in and all of a sudden they can't deploy.
Yeah. Okay. And in all honesty, from experience, we can say Gen 1 vehicles generally do have some problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're past that now. But
absolutely. We're well beyond that. So make sure that electric vehicle manufacturer has a proven track record, vehicles that are being deployed today and that fit for your business model. Number 2, they can provide, as we talked about, the analytic data to show exactly what that vehicle can do on a daily basis. It's not hearsay. It's not blue sky. Here it is. Here's what it is that particular vehicle will do. We see it can fit what your business model looks like. And then talk about the specific upfit, whether it be a simple passenger van or, an ADA van or it's a work truck or whatever it is. Be specific, as we talked about. The GVWR is going to play a big portion of how many batteries you can have in the vehicle and what the true capacity and expectations of that vehicle are going to be. And then most importantly, make sure you're talking in realistic timelines in terms of deployment. Even here at Lightning, there's always something that we're developing or building something new, and we're never going to tell you we can deploy something unless we absolutely can. Unfortunately, in the industry, that seems to be the norm, but we're not going down that path. So, talk to them in realistic timelines. Understand you have to do some planning. Planning an EV fleet is not something you can just go out and buy the vehicle over at a dealership somewhere. It takes planning. It takes a lot of planning, and some of the roadblocks that we talked about inventory and supply chain and stuff is definitely affecting this industry as well, but it's a bigger picture. So, give yourself, if you can, a year. Start your electrification plan, start talking with us, and then we can, over that period, you'll see how fast that'll go. But if you're trying to get into EV tomorrow, it's going to be a challenge.
It's going to be a challenge for sure.
Infrastructure, all of that's got to be put into place. So you got to plan it out pretty well.
Yep. Great.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you,
Awesome.
Roger, for
Thank
that.
you.
Appreciate your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. As I said before, this is just one podcast in our series for the fleet electrification equation. We hope you will check out the other 5 components to that at your convenience. And we hope to see you again on Lightning EV Talk. Thank you.
Thank you.